Hi, it's Paul Anderson, and this is Disciplinary Core Idea PS1A, or it's the first one in the physical science series. This one's on the structure and properties of matter. What is matter? Matter is what the universe is made up of. And so this picture right here has the four phases of matter. We have solid, ice, so that'd be water in a solid form. We've got liquid water. We have gas. There's going to be a lot of water suspended in the air. And then we've got plasma, which is high energy particles. And so that's what the universe is made up of, matter. What is the matter made up of? It's made of atoms. And so everything on our planet is going to be made up of atoms. Atoms themselves are made of smaller particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons, and even those are made of smaller particles. But we're not going to get much deeper than that. Know this, that everything on our planet is made up of around 100 atoms, and those are organized on the periodic table. This is at a museum in Tokyo, and what they do is they'll have hydrogen, for example, and then they're going to show you hydrogen gas or a little bit of lithium metal inside here. So it's actually a periodic table of actual elements or pure substances. And so what should your students know? Well, in the early elementary grades, we should start to talk about substances and matter. And it's good to just use both of those terms. And they should be looking at matter. So they should be looking at metal, liquids, this is wood, this would be Play-Doh, which is going to be matter that's created by humans. And we should look at properties of those. So from the beginning, they should be making observations of matter. What are some observations they could make in kindergarten, for example? Well, they could look at the texture or the textural observations. What does it feel like? They could look at the visual. What is it, metals are clearly going to be shiny versus something like clay that's not going to be as shiny. Even oral observations. What does it sound like when we hit it? And if safety is really, really important, make sure you're doing that. Even tasting it. How is it going to taste different if we're looking at different things? Also, we want to be looking at natural-made substances versus man-made substances. And so wood, for example, is going to be natural, but that Play-Doh I showed you just a second ago is going to be manufactured. Also, they should get this idea that matter is made up of smaller things, and we can talk about that as a concept. And so if you know what Legos are going to be building blocks, but we can build those into bigger blocks. The students should start to understand that even the Legos are made of smaller particles, but we shouldn't even talk about atoms yet. As we move into the upper elementary grades, students should understand that if we take matter, so wood, for example, and cut it into parts, it's still going to be wood. If we cut it again, it's still going to be wood. But if we keep cutting it smaller and smaller and smaller, eventually, if we could do that, it's not going to be visible anymore. Even though we're cutting it, we can't see it, but it doesn't mean that the matter is not there. And so as we get it smaller and smaller and smaller, we eventually get down to the level of atoms. And the word atomos means from indivisible. That's where the word actually comes from. And so your students should understand that everything is made up of these really small particles. But even though they might be invisible particles, it doesn't mean that they're not there. And so we can do observations to show that invisible particles exist. And so where's some invisible particles? Well, there's some right between you and me right now. So the air is not visible, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. So if I were to put air inside a balloon, we could clearly push on it and it's going to push back. And so that would be an experiment we could do to show that these invisible particles actually exist. Or even looking at the leaves moving on the tree is evidence that shows me that those invisible particles actually exist. As we move through elementary, we should talk about the conservation of matter. What does that mean? It means that matter in general can't be created or destroyed. What's a really simple experiment you could do to show this? We could use a scale and take the mass of a certain amount of water. So we could get the mass of the water in the beaker. We could get the mass of sugar cubes. So we could take the masses separately, and then we could dissolve the sugar cubes in the water. And if we do that, we're going to find that the mass of those two at the beginning is going to be equal to the mass at the end. So even though we've dissolved the sugar in the water, it hasn't gone away. Even though we can't see it, it's still there, and the matter is going to be conserved. As we move then into middle school, into the 7th, 8th kind of a grade, we should start to talk about atoms and give them names. And so there are around 100 different atoms that are going to make up all of the substances. Those atoms are organized into molecules. Now, what is a molecule? Let me go back and look at that again. So we've got an atom, and the atom are going to form molecules. Molecules are just going to be made from atoms connecting together. And so molecules can have 2 atoms, or they can have hundreds of atoms. Some will have thousands, like a big protein is going to have thousands of atoms, but they're still made up of, molecules are still made up of atoms connected together. If we have a number of different atoms that are exactly the same, we call that a substance. And so this bar of gold right here is just made of gold. It's 250 kilograms of gold. That'd be over $13 million worth of gold. But it's all made of these one type of atom, gold atoms. Or if we were to look at water, water is a molecule. You can see it's going to be one oxygen and two hydrogens. But it still is a pure substance if we only have that, because it's only one type of molecule. You should also start to talk about phases of matter. There are going to be three phases of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. And I'm going to shoot over to a little animation or a little simulation that shows you how this works. This can be found at PHET, and I'll put a link in the video description down below. So if we were to look at neon, for example, and let me make it a solid, well, what does a solid look like? If this is solid neon, first of all, it's going to be really cold. 13K is 13 Kelvin, which is really getting pretty close to absolute zero. You can see that the molecules are still vibrating and moving.